symptom of the underpinning cultural problem to do with the country. Now, people usually ask me, how does he not being in majority matter to the country? You really have to understand one cultural underpinning of Indian society. And the cultural underpinning is that India has no concept of honor. There's no concept of contracts. There's no concept of friendship. There's no concept of individuality and respect for what you agree with. So your friends and families are your actually biggest enemies.
Wow.
That is why people hide their gold in the ground without telling their own family members, and they erect huge high walls around their houses, because if you don't, then the neighbor will shift the fence overnight. So you have to understand that this is a country without honor. This is a country where you can trust absolutely no one. And the people closest to you are your biggest enemies.
Yeah. What about the people? What about the Indian people? I mean, I know some people in India that, you know, they are educated, but they have no sort of opportunities for employment because the government is not creating this. The government is not sort of taking care of infrastructure and so forth. So what happened to the people? Isn't the government supposed there to sort of, Modi in this case, he's been in power over almost 2 decades now, 14 years to be exact. What has he achieved economically speaking that we can talk of?
Well, he cannot achieve anything, David. I usually like to say that in an organization of 2 people in India, there's 1 person too many. People can't organize in that country. People can't trust each other in that country. And people are completely unskilled. If I need a plumber in San Francisco, I call someone in to do my repair job. If I need a plumber in India, I might need to pay him only a couple of dollars to do my job, but he will create 3 more problems or maybe 5 more new problems for me before he leaves. So I'm better off doing my plumbing job myself in India. And that is what I actually do. So the problem is that Indians are responsible for this status quo. And that is why I always say that Modi is just a symptom of the problem. Modi is not the problem of the country. Neither is Modi the solution of the country's problem. The core problem is Indians are irrational and they don't have the moral fabric. They don't have the honor system. And that is why India will continue to degrade irrespective of which party is in power in that country.
And yet Western analysts are saying, well, the economy of India is going to sort of be, as a matter of fact, I heard some Western think tanks saying that the economy now of India, it will be considered like the 3rd in the world. And I was like, hold on a second. Where are you guys coming up with these statements from? And even one of our viewers in the channel here wrote, his name is Connie Lee, 9678. He wrote, and I quote here, Dr. David, the Indian government has been claiming for each of the last few years that its GDP growth is higher than that of every other country. What would be a way of verifying the calculations of their figure, which sound a bit dubious? End of quote. What do you think, Jahan?
Well, it doesn't matter, David. Even if you consider Indian GDP growth to be 10%, and let's assume that for mathematical purpose to be 10%, it is erroneous to compare GDP growth of a country with GDP per capita of $2,500 with a country whose GDP per capita might be $60,000. So if the United States with $60,000 per capita GDP grows at 1%, it adds $600 per year to its per capita GDP. Whereas if India adds 10% to its per capita GDP, it only adds $250 to its per capita GDP, which means that India would still be growing at half as much pace as the US would be growing with its much relatively insignificant percentage-wise GDP growth. The issue is, David, and we learned this in the middle school, that
Yeah.
you cannot compare percentage with percentages unless the baseline is similar. You can't compare the growth rate of a mouse with a growth rate of an elephant. And that is what the error these big economists do. A lot of them are actually empty suits, and they really are naive and illiterate on cultural basis. They don't really understand that there's a difference between people around the world. Their religions are different, cultures are different. They just look at graphs and think that every country would eventually follow the way China or South Korea did.
I mean, I even read somewhere where it says that it's going to overtake, the Indian economy is going to overtake that of China. I was like, what?
Well,
it's ridiculous.
So 24 hours back, I was in China, David. I spent a lot of time in China. We invest in China through the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. I love China. China and India are not comparable at all. If you wanted me to move to China and live there, I would very, very happily do so. I get freedom in China. I get conveniences, comfort, and facilities in China. If you wanted me to move to live in India, I will shoot myself. That is how different the two countries are. You should not even be comparing India with China. China is a sane country. China is a rational country. You can have a decent existence in China. You cannot have a decent existence in India. I like to say, David, without any exaggeration, that Indians live lives of cultures. They live and die like. That's what you see. The moment you land in India, things are chaotic. People don't really have a sane, dignified existence in that country.